Have you ever wondered why the most caring, intuitive part of you seems irresistibly pulled toward people who take more than they give? It doesn't make sense on paper. You're the giver, the listener, the one who feels everything deeply. You show up for people with your whole heart. And yet, more than once, you found yourself locked in a connection that slowly drained you. The kind that starts with fireworks and ends in confusion. The kind where you ask, how did I get here again? If you've ever been caught in a love that left you more lost than seen, know that you're not alone, and your story matters. Comment 1 if you've ever felt pulled into a connection that started with intensity but left you emotionally empty. Comment not 2 if you found yourself avoiding connection altogether for fear of repeating that cycle. If this pattern sounds familiar, you're not alone, and you're definitely not broken. In fact, your very sensitivity might be part of what draws you into these emotional traps. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and pioneer of analytical psychology, believed that the deepest parts of our psyche, the unconscious, play a powerful role in who and what we're drawn to. He spoke of archetypes, shadows, and inner patterns that guide us without our awareness. And when those forces are at play, we're often pulled not toward what's good for us, but toward what feels emotionally familiar. Even if it hurts, here's the twist. Sometimes we're drawn to our opposite, not out of weakness, but because our psyche is trying to make us whole. Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming fully ourselves. By integrating the parts we've ignored, denied, or hidden. And sometimes the narcissist shows up not just to hurt us, but to reveal what we still need to heal. In this article, we'll explore 5 deep psychological reasons rooted in Jungian theory why empaths often find themselves magnetized to narcissists. By the end, you won't just understand the why behind this painful pattern, you'll also gain the awareness needed to break it. The reason 1, the magnetic pull of the shadow. Have you ever felt strangely drawn to someone you both admire and sense that something is off about? They walk into a room, radiating confidence. They say things you wouldn't dare to say. They do things you've only dared to think about. Maybe they're a bit arrogant, a bit self-centered, yet deep down you feel an intense pull toward them, an attraction you can't quite explain. According to Carl Jung, this is your own shadow being reflected back to you. Jung taught that everyone has a shadow, the hidden part of the psyche that holds the aspects of ourselves we have rejected, concealed, or avoided. For empaths, the shadow often contains traits like assertiveness power and healthy self-interest qualities they've labeled as unacceptable because they've chosen the path of sensitivity, gentleness, and self-sacrifice. Then along comes a narcissist, a living embodiment of everything you've suppressed. They say no when they want to. They put themselves first. They never apologize for being who they are. To your conscious mind, they might be a red flag, but to your unconscious mind, they're a missing piece. Sometimes what draws us in isn't love. It's a reflection of who we've been told not to be. And yet a part of us still longs to know that power. Comment 1 if you've ever felt magnetically drawn to someone who embodied everything you were taught not to be. Comment 2 if you've tried to shut that attraction down without understanding where it came from. Jung called this phenomenon shadow projection, when we unconsciously see our undeveloped parts in someone else and feel magnetically drawn to them as a way for the psyche to seek wholeness. You might think, I just want someone strong who knows who they are. But what you may actually be longing for is permission to be strong within yourself. Here's a simpler image. Imagine you are light, always shining, always healing. But light also casts shadows, and the place you've avoided looking may hold the part of you that's missing. The narcissist, with all their confidence and ambition, may be the shadow you've never dared to face. And that's the first reason for this dangerous attraction. You're not just drawn to them, you're drawn to the shadow within yourself. The second, the savior meets the wounded child. Archetypal dynamics. Have you ever felt like you were sent to help them? Like something in you just knew they were hurting, even if they never said it? This is one of the most seductive forces in an empath narcissist dynamic, the feeling that your love could heal them. In Jungian terms, what's playing out here is an archetypal dance one that's been part of human storytelling and psychology for centuries. Empaths often carry what Jung would call the rescuer or healer archetype. These are not just roles, they're deep psychological patterns shaped by experience, often rooted in early life, where love may have meant being useful, available, or emotionally tuned in. On the flip side, many narcissists, beneath their grandiosity and control, carry the wounded child archetype. This is the part of them that was neglected, shamed, or emotionally stunted early on. But instead of showing this vulnerability, they hide it behind a carefully constructed mask of superiority and charm. Here's where it gets tricky. The empath intuitively senses that wounded child, not consciously, but emotionally. And the rescuer in them feels called to help, to soothe, to fix, to love hard enough that the other person finally feels whole. At first, this feels transcendent. It feels like purpose. You're not just in a relationship, you're on a mission. But over time, this purpose turns into a prison. The more the empath gives, the more the narcissist takes. The more the empath tries to reach that inner child, the more they encounter manipulation, denial, or emotional withdrawal. It becomes a chase that never ends. Think of it like a mythic story. The healer sets out to save the wounded prince, only to realize the prince has built walls so high no amount of love can break through. And meanwhile, the healer is slowly bleeding out. This archetypal pairing is powerful because it taps into both people's deepest unconscious identities. But unless both are aware and willing to grow, it becomes a loop that wounds more than it heals. And that leads us to the third reason, the third: complexes and childhood patterns. Have you ever felt an instant connection with someone, almost like you've known them forever? That deep, immediate pull. It might not have been chemistry. It might have been recognition. According to Carl Jung, we all carry complexes, emotionally charged patterns formed in childhood that live deep in the unconscious. They're like blueprints for how we experience love, safety, and self-worth. And unless we become aware of them, they keep replaying over and over. For many empaths, those early blueprints involve emotional labor. Maybe love came with strings attached. Maybe your caregiver was inconsistent, sometimes nurturing, other times cold or self-absorbed. So you learned that to feel loved, you had to work for it. You had to sense other people's moods. Stay small. Give more than you received. Fast forward to adulthood, and here comes the narcissist. They're emotionally unavailable, but charismatic. Hot one moment, cold the next. They require your energy to feel important. And your unconscious mind says, I know this pattern. Not because it's good, but because it's familiar. Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And part of accepting yourself means recognizing how your past shaped your emotional instincts, even the ones that lead you into pain. It's like your inner child is still looking for the love they never consistently got. And the narcissist mirrors that old relationship dynamic so perfectly that your system lights up with false hope. Maybe this time, if I love hard enough, they won't leave. But it's not love, it's a loop. One that's designed to keep you chasing. Imagine trying to build a new house with an old blueprint one that doesn't account for your growth, your needs, or your boundaries. No matter how much effort you put in the structure, won't feel right. Until you rewrite the blueprint, the cycle continues. The love we chase often mirrors the love we learned, not the love we truly need. Seeing the pattern is the first crack of light. Comment 1 if you've recognized old emotional patterns shaping your relationships. Comment 2 if you're just now beginning to see how your childhood may still echo in your adult love life. And this brings us to the fourth reason, the attraction of opposites in how we think and feel. The fifth opposites in psychological functions: thinking, feeling, sensing, intuition. Ever thought they're so different from me? But somehow we just click until suddenly you don't. In Jung's typology of personality, each of us has a psychological function we lead with. For empaths, it's often a combination of feeling, valuing harmony, emotional connection, and intuition, perceiving meaning beneath the surface. This means you're naturally tuned into moods, subtle energies, unspoken truths. You feel your way through life. Now enter the narcissist. Their dominant functions often lean toward thinking logic, structure, detachment, and sensing what's tangible, visible, measurable. They prioritize results, appearances, control. While you're picking up the emotional atmosphere in the room, they're focused on who's in charge and what can be gained. At first, this contrast feels exciting. They seem grounded, decisive, unapologetically practical. You admire their clarity, their confidence, their no-nonsense approach. It feels like they balance you out, like they offer something you lack. But over time, the very thing that attracted you becomes the thing that hurts you. Because when you try to share your inner world, they don't meet you there. When you express emotional needs, they dismiss them as too much. When you speak from the heart, they counter with cold logic. And slowly, the connection you thought was deep starts to feel hollow. Jung believed that opposites often attract because the psyche seeks wholeness. We're unconsciously drawn to people who represent our undeveloped functions, not to stay with them, but to awaken those aspects in ourselves. The problem arises when we mistake this pull for compatibility instead of opportunity. Think of it like two puzzle pieces they seem to fit, but only because their shapes are opposite. That doesn't mean they create a healthy whole. It might just mean your psyche is inviting you to grow in a new direction, not to fuse with someone else, but to become more integrated yourself. And speaking of illusions, that brings us to the fifth and final reason. The last reason, the persona and the illusion of perfection. Do you remember how they made you feel in the beginning? Like you were the center of their world, like you were special, seen, chosen, like they finally got you in a way no one else ever had. That was no accident. That was the persona at work. In Jungian psychology, the persona is the mask we wear in social settings, the version of ourselves we craft to be accepted, admired, or powerful in the eyes of others. We all have one. It's part of how we function in society. But for some, especially narcissists, the persona becomes everything. Narcissists often master this mask. In the early stages of a relationship, Especially during what's known as the love bombing phase, they present a dazzling, almost too good to be true version of themselves. They're attentive, charming, magnetic. They mirror your dreams' values and emotional depth. You think, finally, someone who understands me. But here's the trap: you weren't falling in love with them. You were falling in love with their mask. And as an empath, your natural tendency to see the best in others, to look past flaws, and believe in their potential makes you especially vulnerable to this illusion. You want it to be real, so you ignore red flags. You explain away bad behavior. You hold on to the memory of who they were at the start, hoping that version will return. Jung warned that over-identifying with the persona leads to disconnection from the true self, both in the person wearing the mask and in those who are pulled in by it. When you invest your heart into someone's projected image, you're not in a relationship with who they are. You're in a relationship with who they pretend to be. And when the mask starts to slip, as it always does, the empath is left confused, heartbroken, and wondering, was it ever real? Here's the truth. It wasn't real, but your feelings were. And those feelings deserve to be honored, not used against you. This illusion of perfection isn't your failure. It's your call to awaken, to see not just who they are, but who you've been taught to become in order to feel loved. So now you know that magnetic pull you've felt. It wasn't just chemistry. That cycle you've repeated. It wasn't just bad luck. That pain you've carried. It wasn't because you're too sensitive or too trusting. It was your unconscious calling you home. Carl Jung famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And that's exactly what this pattern between empaths and narcissists reveals: not a flaw in your heart, but a fracture in your psyche. A part of you reaching out not to be hurt again, but to finally be made whole. Each of the 5 Jungian forces we've explored: the shadow, the archetypal healer, the old emotional blueprints, the attraction of opposites, and the illusion of the persona. They're not just explanations. They're invitations. Invitations to wake up to your own story, to meet the parts of you that were formed in pain, shaped in childhood, and carried silently into adulthood. But now you have a choice. When you understand why you're drawn in, you no longer have to stay. When you see the pattern, you can step out of it. When you meet your shadow, you stop needing others to reflect it back to you in toxic ways. The narcissist may have mirrored your wounds, but now you can become the one who mirrors your own worth. Individuation. The process Jung believed was the key to becoming fully yourself begins not when you find the right person, but when you stop chasing your missing pieces in someone else. When you look inward and find them already there. So the next time that familiar attraction shows up, that spark that feels a little too intense, a little too consuming, pause. Ask yourself, not just, why do I feel this? But what part of me is seeking healing through this person? And know this: the love you've been trying to give away, it was always meant for you first. Take a breath. Let this sink in. You were never too much. You were never naive. You were never broken for loving deeply. You were simply trying to become whole. And for a time, you believed that wholeness could come through someone else. But now, you know what you were really chasing wasn't love. It was reunion with the forgotten parts of yourself. Jung taught that the unconscious doesn't just live in our dreams or our fantasies. It lives in our attractions, our obsessions, our heartbreaks. Each relationship that unraveled you was a message from your deeper self whispering, there is more of you to find. You saw beauty in someone else because it exists in you. You saw potential in someone else because it lives in you. You saw pain in someone else because it echoes within you. But here's the turning point, the moment of individuation, when you stop trying to save others as a substitute for saving yourself. Let this be your liberation. You are not here to complete someone else's story. You are here to reclaim your own. So what now? Maybe it's time to get curious about your shadow, not fear it. To notice when the healer in you wants to rescue and gently ask who's really in need right now, them or me. To trace your emotional patterns back to where they began, not to blame, but to understand. You don't need to become harder or colder to protect yourself. You need to become whole, integrated, awake. That's the Jungian path, not to escape pain, but to transform through it. And if you're wondering where to begin, ask yourself this. Which of these 5 patterns feels most familiar to me? Where does that live in my story? Because awareness is the first step. And the moment you see the pattern clearly, it stops being your fate. You are not powerless. You are not destined to repeat the cycle. You are already the healing you've been trying to give away. So go inward. Befriend your shadow. Reclaim your inner child. Balance your gifts with boundaries. And never ever mistake someone's mask for their soul. Your journey isn't to find the one. It's to become the one you've always needed. And in the words of Carl Jung, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This isn't just about relationships. It's about reclaiming your story, one brave, honest step at a time. Comment 1 if you feel ready to stop chasing love as a way to fix old wounds. Comment 2 if you're still figuring out what it means to become the one you've always needed.